far from the home I love. Minor. Isn't that brilliant?
The Broadway Maven recently welcomed online music educator Mateo Chavez Lewis for a conversation about music theory and Broadway.
YouTube channel, Music Theater Theory, is really quite good. That's how I first found him. I used a clip of his company, actually, video on Marry Me a Little in my company class. And I've enjoyed seeing more of his channel and invited him to come. And then after that, we decided that he was going to help as a co-host for the class.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.
We're going to talk a little bit about music in Broadway. Because obviously the thing that sets musical theater apart from other forms of theater is the fact that it has music involved in it, and that the music helps tell the story and connect us to the characters. And so I'm going to talk about just some of the very basic ways in which composers are able to do that, connect us to the characters through music. And you don't need to know a ton of music theory, and you don't need to know what a F sharp minor 7 flat 5 chord over B flat is in order to understand how music affects us, because that's the whole point of music, is that it affects us in a very visceral way. If you think about the way that human beings respond to sound, it's evolved in us from generations, from back when we were proto-hominids living in the jungle, that when we hear a sound, we respond to it immediately, without thinking. Our body physically responds to it before we have a chance to cognitively and consciously process it. That's because, if we heard a rustle in the bushes, that might be a predator. We gotta get out of there. So our body responds to it viscerally. And that's how music is able to affect us viscerally as well. Because by using sound, it gets to our automatic responses instead of going to our brains. So we don't have time to think about it. We don't have time to analyze it in the moment. We can go back and analyze it afterwards, and that's what I love doing. Figure out why that affected us in that way. But we don't have time to analyze it in the moment. It just affects us instantly. And that's part of what makes music so powerful, especially as a storytelling tool.
Visit thebroadwaymaven.com to find out about a free weekly Broadway appreciation course every Monday at noon and 7 p.m.
So I think that music affects us in two main ways. The first way is expectation versus reality, and the second way is tension versus release. So the two main ways that music affects us are expectation versus reality and tension versus release. The first one, expectation versus reality. If we are expecting to hear something and then we hear something else and we're surprised in that way, we can't help but feel the difference. We can't help but feel, oh, I was expecting that to be a much higher note, but then they went down. It affects us viscerally, and these expectations that we have of music are set up by the composer, so they can be set up by repetition. If in every verse so far the composer's gone, we start to go, okay, I'm expecting to resolve on that chord. I'm expecting it to sound like this, right? But then if suddenly it goes, oh, whoa, that was different than we expected, we feel that. We feel that change in energy in our guts, because we're surprised by it. It can also be set up by our cultural expectations. I mean, every culture has a deep and rich musical tradition in their own right. In the Western culture, I'm from Canada. I know a lot of you are from the US. In that kind of Western culture, we're really used to hearing this that sound is very familiar to us, which is a 4-5-1 is the technical term for any musical nerds out there, or a 2-5-1. But you don't need to know that. But it's a sound that we've heard in a billion different songs, so we're used to hearing it.
Lots more music theory at Mateo's YouTube channel. Link in the description.
And same with if you turn on the pop station on your radio in 2022, you're gonna hear a lot of these chords. used to hearing those, you know? So when somebody is giving us this chord progression, we're like, oh, we know where this is going. You know, we know it's going to go here. We've heard this before. And that's only because of our cultural background. Different people from different cultures wouldn't know necessarily that this chord progression was supposed to go this way, because it's a staple of our culture. So if a composer were to write this chord progression and then give us a surprise, we would all be like, whoa, what was that? But somebody from a different culture might not notice it as such a huge surprise, because they wouldn't have the same expectations set up. So that's kind of the first main thing to understand, is that everyone's expectations are different, and so knowing your audience and knowing what kind of expectations you as the composer can set up, either through repetition or what kind of expectations they already have based on their cultural background, and so that you can then take those expectations and subvert them to surprise the audience and to make them feel. The second thing is tension versus release. Tension versus release is a really simple concept to grasp. This is a major chord. It sounds nice, you know? And there are all sorts of scientific reasons why the major chord sounds nice, dealing with the ratio of sound waves and stuff. But I don't need to get into that. All I need to know is that the major chord sounds nice. But this chord doesn't sound nice. I think most people would agree. However, if we take this chord that doesn't sound nice, there's all this tension between the notes that they don't work in harmony, they're kind of clashing with each other. And if we take that chord and then move each note to the major chord, we release all that tension. We take this note that's crunching with that note and we just move them apart so that they work in harmony. Now we've got a release. And that, we feel that in our gut, that like, oh, this is tense, this is uncomfortable, this is uncomfortable, and then, oh, there's a sound that we know and we're familiar with, oh my god, and it's a relief, and we all just kind of breathe a collective sigh of relief when we get to that major chord after hearing all those tensions. And you can do rhythmic tension too, like if I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, if I'm playing right on the beat, there's not a lot of tension in that, it's lining up exactly with the beat. But I can play what's called a syncopation, which is when I play off the beat. I can play off the beat like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or whatever. And then finally when I land back on the beat, there's a release in that tension as well. So there's harmonic tension, there's rhythmic tension. Anything that doesn't sound nice or sound like it fits together well can be a tension. And then you change it so that it does fit together, and that's a release, and everybody breathes a big sigh of relief. So those are the two basic ways that I think music affects us: expectation versus reality, tension versus release. And so you can use these as a composer in a musical to help the audience follow the character's journey. I once had a very prominent composer in Canada who I respect a lot, Britta Johnson, tell me that the characters can lie in a musical, but the music can't lie. So what that means is that if you've got something that is very full of tension, like we were talking about before, and the character's saying something on top like, I love you so very, very much, it sounds like maybe, to the audience, maybe that character's hiding something, you know? And there's a whole bunch of examples of that we'll get into. But that's the core point of music in a musical, is to bring the audience in using these ways that music can viscerally affect us. It's to get us viscerally invested in the journey of the characters. So that's just a little bit about music in general. So we're going to talk about today 3 kind of musical techniques that composers use to communicate the story in this way. We're going to talk about minor versus major, so using minor chords or using major chords, and what that says about a character's journey. We're going to talk about key changes and how those can take us to the next level and how they can raise the stakes and change the thought process. And we're going to talk about motifs, which is something that originated in opera with like Richard Wagner used a lot of motifs, but they're now used in musical theater all the time, most noticeably recently in Hamilton. Hamilton is full of motifs, so we're going to talk about the motifs in Hamilton. So there we go. Minor versus major, key changes, and motifs are going to be kind of the three techniques that I'm going to kind of walk you through. Before we get to that, though, I want to kind of shine some light on the homework, because I was talking about 11 o'clock numbers in a video with David. And I asked, what is your favorite 11 o'clock number, and why is it so effective, do you think? And so some of my favorite replies, I'm going to read them out to you if you don't mind. Because I found these really interesting. So Annette Minich, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She says, I think my favorite Broadway 11 o'clock number is Gimme 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 from Thoroughly Modern Millie, which is a great one. There are so many mood changes as she reaches her decision to follow Cupid's famous arrow that it feels operatic in scope. Each key change leads her farther along in her journey of personal discovery. So I want you to remember that, because Annette hit the nose on the head there. Each key change leads her farther along in her journey of personal discovery. We're going to talk about that, the key changes. That's a really great observation. Thank you, Annette, for that. Sherry Schiff says, I like Let's Go Fly a Kite from Mary Poppins. It shows the journey that Mr. Banks has taken and where he's ended up, caring about his family more than his work. I was really surprised by this. I've never thought of Let's Go Fly a Kite as an 11 o'clock number, but it absolutely is in that way. It shows the journey that the characters have gone on. It summarizes all of that. It's 100% an 11 o'clock number in every sense of the term. So thank you, Sherry, for bringing that to my attention. I appreciate that. And Jill Skywalker says, I love Telephone Wire from Fun Home. The concept of adult Allison stepping into middle Allison's shoes and reflecting on the memory was so eye-opening for me, especially when Allison's father was still looking at adult Allison as college Allison backed off stage. The past cannot change, yet adult Allison now sees how both middle Allison and her father failed to communicate with each other effectively, leading to the story's ending, which, of course, for those of you who don't know, Allison's father commits suicide. Had both people reacted differently at the time, the ending might have been different. Adult Allison wishes to change the memory, but knows it won't lead to a different ending. And that is a textbook example of an 11 o'clock number. She's learning something. She's gone on this journey trying to change the past, and she learns in this song that she can't. And she has to... And that's a lesson that she's learned over the course of the whole show, and she's singing about it. I actually think Fun Home has two 11 o'clock numbers, because I think Telephone Wire is Allison's 11 o'clock number, and then I think Bruce has an 11 o'clock number in Edges of the World. And they kind of learn the opposite thing in a lot of ways. So those are kind of three of my favorite of the homework responses that I saw. There were a lot of really great responses, so thank you to everyone who commented. David, over to you. I think you've got a reel for us.
Yeah, thank you. Great class so far. I'm really looking forward to hearing some of what you've described is coming next, especially from Hamilton, because I'm seeing Hamilton on Wednesday. Some announcements of what's coming up in the class. I'm going to share this.
The Broadway Maven is the only free weekly Broadway appreciation course you'll find online. Every Monday and Thursday at noon and 7 p.m. Eastern, we look at topics as diverse as A Chorus Line, Fiddler on the Roof, and Mel Brooks musicals. Here are the coming attractions for May 2022. On June 6th, in time for Pride Month, it's Gay Broadway. My weekly blast comes out every Thursday. For just $36 a year, you get my interpretations of Broadway, my rants, my raves, my YouTube gems, and more. And then there's my YouTube channel. Recent videos are on topics like Broadway's symbolic names, a Sondheim rhyme quiz, Broadway bell tones, Broadway's toughest line, and 10-minute versions of 4 Rodgers and Hammerstein shows. You can find links to all upcoming classes, plus information on my other projects at thebroadwaymaven.com.
We've got 3 musical techniques to look at. Of course, there are a trillion cajillion. And developing your skills as a composer often means learning more of these kinds of techniques, studying how they work in other musicals, and then finding new and interesting ways to play with them and to use them for your own shows. I'm going to look at only 3. There are so many of them. But let's start with minor versus major. So very, very basic music theory lesson for everybody. A major scale sounds like this. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. You've heard it before. We've all heard it before. Most notably in The Sound of Music. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. There's a whole song about it. But it's in everything. We all know the major scale. Everyone's heard it. And it's kind of the basic building blocks of what the most basic like Western music tradition is built off of, is that major scale. A lot of other cultures use different scales way more often, but we use the major scale here as, you know, the Western civilization. So that's kind of what I'm going to be focusing on, just because that's the musical tradition that I grew up with. And it's the musical tradition that a lot of Broadway is based on. Less so recently, because we've started to see shows from other cultures, like the band's Visit, which uses a lot of other scales that are from that musical tradition. But for the most part, historically, Broadway has been a very kind of Western civilization landscape, and so it uses a lot of the major scale. And that's what I was talking about with expectations being set up by our cultural reference points. On Broadway, if you use a scale that isn't the major scale, you're already subverting the expectations of your audience. Because most people walking into that theater, I would say 99.99999% of the people walking into that theater grew up in a musical tradition that's based around that major scale. So that major scale to us sounds really settled and happy and triumphant, and all the notes work really well together. You know? Now, if you take the major scale and you just lower a few of the notes to make them a little bit darker, to make them what's called in music flat, you get this. All I did was I took the major scale and then I lowered the 3rd note, the 6th note, and the 7th note. 3rd note, 6th note, 7th note. Which I can go into why it's those 3 notes, but just take my word for it, there's a good reason. It's the 3rd note, the 6th note, and the 7th note. And suddenly, I have what's called a minor scale. Which doesn't sound so triumphant, happy, bright. It sounds darker. It sounds melancholy or even angry. You know, it carries a lot more weight to it. It's a lot darker. It's hard to assign objective labels to the way that music sounds, because different things can sound different in different contexts. But in general, major, hopeful, happy, bright, triumphant, you know? And minor, sad, frustrated, angry, scary. All of these darker emotions come in the minor scale. So, what you can do is you can use these sounds, the sound of a major chord or the sound of a minor chord, to use them as kind of a paintbrush to color the things that your character is saying. And my favorite example of this, and a brilliant piece of writing, is Far From the Home I Love from Fiddler on the Roof. Because this song is about Hoddle singing about the conflict she feels between going to be with her love, but that means leaving her home. And it's this really happy thing, she's being reunited with her love, and it's this really sad thing, she's leaving the home she loves. And that's painted in the music by switching between major and minor. It's brilliant. Listen to this. There where my heart has settled long ago, I must go, I must go. Major chords. There where my heart has settled. I must go. And then we get a minor chord. Who could imagine I'd be wandering so far from the home I love? Minor. Isn't that brilliant? That's a great piece of writing, because we have this major chord to show us how happy Hoddle is that she's going to be reunited with her love, but then this minor chord to show us how sad she is that she's leaving. And we get kind of both parts of this internal emotional conflict that Hoddle's experiencing. It is a piece of genius. So moving on, there's minor versus major. Next we have key changes. So, the great thing about the major scale is that you can play it starting on any note on the piano. And if you follow the same pattern of notes, you get a major scale. What that means is that if we're making a song based around the major scale and we play it in a major scale that starts on a different note on the piano, it's going to sound exactly the same in terms of the melody. It's just going to be now in a different key, is what we call it, because it starts on a different key on the piano. So, for example, if I were to play, like, I'm Canadian, so if I were to play "Oh Canada," you know, we have "Oh Canada" starting on C, but I can also go "Oh Canada" starting on F sharp, and they're both "Oh Canada," they're just in different keys. And something that we can do when we're composing music is that we can change the keys halfway through the song, and that gives us different feelings and different emotions. For example, the classic thing to do is to have a big key change at the end of a song, like for the last chorus, so that the last chorus is in a higher key. Because as soon as the notes are higher, that literally means that the sound wave is vibrating at a higher frequency, so there's literally more energy in it, like physically, by science. There's more energy in a higher key. So if we want to increase the energy near the end and drive home to that big finish, we can add a key change. And that's great in musical theater, especially because we're trying to tell a story with our music. We're not just trying to capture a moment or have something that is playable on repeat. We're trying to tell a story from a through line, you know, with a beginning, middle, and end. And we want to end in a different place than we started. So if we want to, an easy way to do that, to make that change, is to add a key change so that the stakes get higher and the character comes up with a new idea. So that was very astutely observed by, I forget, was it Annette? Yeah, Annette, who said that in Gimme Gimme from Thoroughly Modern Millie, they have those key changes that that build her decision, and that each of them articulates a new thought. It's a new thought, we're in a new key. That happens in Gimme Gimme, it happens all over the place. It happens in Waving Through a Window, you know, from Dear Evan Hansen. At the end of the bridge, it cuts out and he goes, "Will I ever make a sound?" And then we come back in a higher key, and it happens all the time. Another great example is Don't Rain on My Parade. Changes keys for just the very last note, which is brilliant. It goes, "Nobody, no nobody is gonna rain on my parade." So it starts in A major. "Nobody, no nobody is gonna rain on my parade." It goes up to B major for just that ending, which gives it so much more excitement, so much more energy, driving home to that big finish. And it takes Fanny, the character in the musical, from being in A major, which is where she started, to being in B major, which is the new key where she's more triumphant, she's more sure of her decision, and that's the power of key changes. The next thing, and this is kind of my favorite thing to talk about because it goes so deep. The next thing to talk about is motifs. So a motif is anything that repeats, basically. It can be a musical motif. That's kind of what we're going to talk about because that's my area of expertise. But you can also have lyrical motifs, words and images that repeat in the lyrics. You can have motifs in the costumes. These people have this color on their costume. That's a motif as well. All of that stuff. Anything that is kind of repetitive that is carried through from one piece of a cohesive work to the next. And this was kind of introduced in music by like Richard Wagner and those composers of that era writing opera. But it's used in, like I said, Hamilton. Hamilton is full of motifs, which are like repeated musical moments. So we have motifs can kind of represent a bunch of different things. 3 of my favorite kind of motifs are character motifs, memory motifs, and then motifs that send a message to the audience. So the first one, character motifs. Every time Angelica is on stage, in Hamilton, this is associated with the sound of Angelica. However it goes. We get that piano, and that tells us, okay, Angelica's here, and it forges a connection between the audience and the character, because the audience gets used to hearing the same musical information every time that character steps out on stage. So they start to feel like they know that character really well because they know what they're going to hear when that character is there. And then it can be used in like cool, clever little ways, like if there's somebody who's in disguise, and you don't want to tell the audience yet, but you want to drop a little hint, you can use their character motif, If like and they did this in like the score of like the Scooby-Doo movie, where they, like the bad guy's theme in The Mask was the theme of the character who was actually underneath the mask, but they didn't tell the audience that, but his music was in the... So you can do cool things with that. In scoring with character motifs. There's also memory motifs, and this is one of my favorite ones because it can tell you what a character is thinking about or the moment in a character's life that they're remembering when they make a decision, and it can help you understand why they're making that decision. For example, in Hamilton, when Eliza kind of commits to Hamilton and professes her love for him, she does it in this song called That Would Be Enough. And I don't need a legacy, I don't need money, as long as you come home at the end of the day, that would be enough. Right? That's how it goes. As long as you come home at the end of the day. So listen to those chords. Listen to that bass line. Ready? I hope you were listening, because now we're going to skip to the end of Act 2, when Eliza has been betrayed by Hamilton, and she's burning his letters and erasing herself from the narrative, and she sings this song called Burn. And she goes, I hope that you burn. Did you hear that? She's remembering the moment where she committed herself to him and where she professed her love to him. And that makes her heartbreak so much more powerful. And it's all done through 4 notes that repeat. Like, that's the power of music. If you use these kinds of techniques, like, the amount of emotional information that you can communicate in 4 notes is unbelievable. So that's a really fantastic example of how to use a motif for emotional effect. The last thing is that a motif can kind of represent a message to the audience. I like to talk about Sweeney Todd for this one. Every time you hear this, you know that the ensemble is going to come out and narrate. and it's a version of the Ballad of Sweeney Todd. They're going to tell you, oh, Sweeney did this, Sweeney did that, and they're going to kind of narrate the action. And it's the same thing in Hamilton. Every time you hear, that means that Aaron Burr is about to come out, and Aaron Burr is going to narrate what's happening. It starts at the very top of the show. How does a bastard, orphan, son of a whore and a Scotsman, dropped in the middle of a forgotten, etc., etc. But it also happens in, like, Guns and Ships. It happens in A Winter's Ball. It happens, like, in What Did I Miss? It happens wherever Aaron comes out to narrate what's going on. We get that rhythm. Which is also, fun fact, I'm not throwing away my shot. So that's a fun fact about how Lin-Manuel found that little motif. So it can send a message to the audience. It can say, hey, audience, listen up. There's narrative information coming, so listen closely. It can send a message to the audience in that way. That's option A. Option B is it can represent a memory in the character's life that they are then reflecting on, which can inform why they're making a decision. And we use the audience and go, oh, that's why they're making that decision, because they're remembering that memory from before and making their decision based on that experience in their lives. So that's option B. And then option C is that it can represent a character, which forges a connection between the audience and the character, because the audience starts to feel like they know who this person is, and they become familiar, and so they become bonded to the character in that way. So that when Angelica comes out and has her theme, and she says, I'm not here for you, I know my sister like I know my own mind, and she tears Hamilton apart in Act 2, we're like, yes, Angelica, awesome, because we have this combination of notes that makes us feel connected to Angelica and makes us want to cheer for her. So those are 3 ways, and I mean there are a billion more, 3 ways that you can use motifs. And so those are kind of the main 3 techniques that I wanted to look at today. We've got minor versus major, to paint the words that your character is saying with an emotional color. We've got key changes to build anticipation, to raise the stakes, raise the energy, and to make sure that we don't end in the same place as we started. And then we've got motifs, which can be used, like I said, to represent characters, memories, and to give us more emotional information that way. So that is a little bit about how music is used in Broadway shows to communicate things and to affect people. I have a discussion question for all of you.
All right.
Which is that, what are your favorite songs from musicals or moments in musicals? Like, what are your favorite moments in a musical? And then how do those moments use the music to add to the story that we're seeing? David, do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, I'll just give you one, and maybe you'll tell me how the music does it, because I don't know.
Alrighty.
Jean Valjean comes out, and he says, what's all this fighting all about? Will someone tear these two apart? This is a factory, not a circus. He just comes out, and he just sings that, and he shuts everybody up because they were all shouting. I like how he uses his music to take control.
That's a motif, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure there's a...
I should have known your little secret. Ah, yes, the virtuous Fantine. So they end up repeating that song when he talks about how she's a prostitute.
Oh.
Anyway.
Interesting. Maybe there's something to be said there about how that motif then is used as the motif of, like, this factory, and the bosses of this factory use that to exercise control, and maybe it shows that Valjean uses that motif for good, and the foreman uses it for evil, you know, something like that.
Great. Okay, and then I'll give you one more, which is the melisma in Heaven on Their Minds, where he says, we are occupied. Have you forgotten how put down we are? And I like that because he is complaining about their situation. and yet he stops words, right?
Mm-hmm.
One note, and it's like agony. It's like, oh my God, wake up, Jesus, look at what we're in. And I don't even have the words for it. I'm just going to give you a bunch of notes on one syllable because that's how I feel. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I love, and that's a really good example of using the vernacular of the musical tradition that you're working from. You know, if you were in a classical song and someone, like if you were singing Some Enchanted Evening and someone went, never let her go, you'd be like, what the hell was that? That's so weird. But in the context of a rock musical, where that's very much part of the musical tradition that we're working from, using that to communicate emotion is really, really effective. You know, so it's all about context.
Okay. Somebody used the word character signature in the chat. Is that the right term for what you were talking about before?
Character signature?
Yeah. Is that the same thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That totally is those are interchangeable, I think.
I know that like in Western movies, you've got something like I think Darth Vader has one, and in there you go. Right, and in The Wizard of Oz, da 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 da.
Yeah, I don't know how to play that one. That was hard.
Right.
Something like that.
You hear that and you know immediately what's going on.
Yeah.
Any of them that come to mind for the Broadway canon that are just overwhelmingly obvious?
Well, I mean, Hamilton uses them ad nauseum, right? Every character has one.
Uh-huh.
I'm trying to think of an older example. Something. There's in Wicked, we get the "Have another drink, my dark-eyed beauty" in the opening number, and spoiler alert, that's the wizard, and the wizard is Elphaba's dad, but we don't know that yet. But we get that, like, "Have another drink, my dark-eyed beauty" is the same. Like, the wizard sings that same melody at a different point in Wonderful.
Uh-huh.
You know, it's like the wizard's.
If we're paying attention, we know who he is already.
Exactly, yeah.
But if we're not paying attention, we still might have on some level, a sense, a memory from the music that when we finally figure it out, is like, oh, I heard that.
Yeah. Or even if you don't even recognize, that's the great thing about music, is it can affect us so subconsciously that if you heard that, you know, your brain might have like very loosely related the two in a way that you weren't aware of, so that when you find out the information, maybe you're not like, oh, I heard that, but maybe you're like, oh, that makes sense to me for some reason, and I can't tell you why, but it just makes sense. And it's because it's in the music. It's mind control. It's awesome.
I'll give you one more, which is, I don't think the recording of Ben Platt doing Dear Evan Hansen's Waving Through a Window, I don't think when he goes waving through a window, I don't think his voice is as good. I don't think it's quiet, and I think that's on purpose, right? I hear Evan striving and not quite being able to get there. And I think the music is working with the lyrics and with the performance.
100%, I think so, right? Like, if you look at the score for Waving Through a Window, the notes that poor gentleman has to sing are unbelievably high. Yeah. But it makes sense that, like, it's this, like, broken, helpless little kid who is desperately trying, you know, and isn't succeeding, and it makes us feel really bad for him, watching him, like, struggle to, like, wave it, to, like, croak out these notes. Like, it's if it was in a lower key and he had no problem with it and he could just go waving through a window, it wouldn't have the same effect, you know. So then that's a really good example of using your performer's vocal range to its fullest ability, using where do they sound powerful, where don't they sound powerful, and how can we use both of those colors.
Isn't Into the Woods full of motif music? which?
Full of it, yeah.
Right.
Well,
Full of it.
The witch is like dun, 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 right? Isn't there a...
Yeah, some sort of chord.
Right.
This is fabulous. How would you characterize Because I Knew You at the end of Wicked? Is it an 11 o'clock song? Is it a shift between major and minor with the tension in their relationship, but then realizing that it is that relationship that made them who they were? How would you look at a song like Because I Knew You?
For good.
It's a great song. It's a great song. It's interesting. This is a question I get a lot when I talk about kind of my theories on 11 o'clock numbers, because it comes after No Good Deed, right? Like in the order of the show, it goes No Good Deed and then For Good. Actually, I think it's No Good Deed and then March of the Witch Hunters, technically, and then For Good, and then the finale. So No Good Deed is separated from the finale by like 3 songs. But I still think that the true 11 o'clock number in that show is No Good Deed and is not For Good. Because Elphaba is talking about all of the ways she's failed over the course of the whole musical and talking about what she's learned from that. And that lesson is really tragic, that no good deed goes unpunished. That's a really tragic lesson.
So, Mateo, here's an interesting question. Let's say you just said that and Stephen Schwartz was in the room, and he said, no, For Good is my 11 o'clock number. Do you then lose, or do you have the right as an interpreter of the show to decide that he's wrong about what the 11 o'clock number is?
Well, I think it depends on people's definitions, right? He might mean the 11 o'clock number is if your definition of 11 o'clock number is, this is a great song that the audience will leave humming and that will make them feel emotional right before the end of the show, then following that logic, then yes, For Good is the 11 o'clock number. But if you define it like I like to define it as like the big song where the protagonist shares what they've learned, by that definition, then it's No Good Deed, right? And so if Stephen Schwartz and I have different definitions of 11 o'clock number, that's fine. But Stephen Schwartz definitely intended to make No Good Deed be the big number where Elphaba shares what she's learned, and he definitely intended For Good to be the beautiful number that sums up their relationship, you know? And if that's what you call an 11 o'clock number, then he would call that an 11 o'clock number, you know? And it depends on the definition. But, yeah, so I think squabbling about definitions with Stephen Schwartz would be... I think if I was getting coffee with Stephen Schwartz, I think I would have better ways to spend that time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go with Lee. Hi, Lee.
Hi, I just wanted to add, I don't know if this counts particularly as a musical, but Pink Floyd's The Wall has a very distinct motif throughout it. We don't need no education. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
That's big brain stuff there, because that's 100% true. And that's the thing, is that these kinds of techniques they're used on the Broadway stage, but they're used in all sorts of musical storytelling. And with The Wall, right, it's not a musical, but it's a cohesive work of music that tells a story from front to back, you know? And in albums like that, a lot of those kinds of albums, you know, like The Who's Tommy, like a lot of those albums get turned into musicals because they are stories. And a recent one in the hip-hop world is Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly. Uses all of the techniques I just shared. That's in like rap music, you know, in hip-hop, R&B. So it's in all forms of like musical storytelling. So that's a really astute observation. Thank you for that.
Cool. Let's go with Annette. Hi, Annette.
Hi, I wanted to weigh in on the Stephen Schwartz debate on what is the 11 o'clock number.
Yeah.
And I kind of follow the death of the author concept, that once the composer has put this out into the world, then the individual, either performers in a concert thing, or when you're doing the whole show, that's the performer, the director, the music director, that's their call, is my feeling.
Yeah, see, I'm with Annette on this, and this actually... Annette, were you at my interview with Winnie Holzman? when she came, she wrote the book for Wicked, and
Yes, I did.
Was I twice asked her, I have this theory about the wizard and something that he said, and I asked her twice, and she said, no, I don't think that's it. And I said to her, don't I have the right as somebody who observes and analyzes it? And she said, 100% absolutely. I want you, and people can go and watch the interview. It's really one of my better interviews. I want you to go and have your own interpretation and to feel empowered to look at our show and to analyze it however you want. And that felt really good. And then afterwards, she sent me an email saying, David, I've been thinking about it, and you might be right. I'm going to ask Stephen. So.
Oh, that's fabulous.
Okay.
Something that I love about art in general is that so much of what we as artists put into it is subconscious, and then so much of what we as the audience take away from it is also subconscious. You know, if we're only using 10% of our brain is conscious or whatever the statistic is, like the rest is all happening subconsciously. And so it's really interesting to see what people pick up on consciously and what is subconscious. Because I don't know what you're referencing about the wizard, but I think that might have appeared there subconsciously on the part of the writers, and you picked up on it consciously.
Right.
You know, that happens all the time. Right. And vice versa, where the writers put something in consciously and the audience picks up on it subconsciously. So it's always really interesting to see that.
Yeah, Cindy.
Well, Les Miserables, I know, is, excuse me, just full of motifs everywhere. Like
yeah, out the wazoo.
Scene, Come to Me is the same melody as his Confession melody. Right.
My mind immediately goes to one of my favorite songs, which is from La Cage, which is I Am What I Am. It starts off kind of timidly, like he's sticking his toe in the water and almost a whisper, and then it starts to pick up the confidence. And then the tempo picks up and it turns into indignation, where he's just saying, this is me, and if you don't like it, you know, the heck with you. And I think that's for everybody, no matter what they are and who they are, you know, as to, you know, take me for what I am or I don't need you. What musically fits, does that category fits into? I think maybe all of them.
I Am What I Am. There's something really interesting about what you said is how he kind of evolves from timidness to indignation to like triumph at the end almost. And that's in the key changes, right? Like we were talking about key changes. That song goes up keys like 75 times. It just keeps climbing higher and higher and higher as he gets more and more convinced. And it also gets faster and faster and faster, tempo-wise. So there are two kinds of musical information there that are being used to show that character's journey. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know La Cage as well as I want to. I think I Am What I Am comes at the end of Act 1. Is that right? It's kind of the Act 1 finale.
Well, We Are What We Are to the same tune starts the show, and then at the act I think it's at the Act 1 finale. She sings, she sings I Am What I Am in declaration of identity. It's
That's very interesting to me. I think. Let me look up the song list of La Cage aux Folles, because I think
he says it's at the end of Act 1. So does David.
Because I would say that it's closer to Defying Gravity in Wicked than it is close to No Good Deed. You know, it's a declaration of of defiance, and it raises the stakes of the conflict. You know, the conflict isn't resolved. It's exactly. It's not sharing a lesson. It's declaring a commitment to the fight. And then we're going to have that fight in Act 2 and learn from it by the end of Act 2. You know, so it kind of serves a different purpose, even though musically it's kind of got a lot of the same elements. As what an 11 o'clock number would be. Yeah, it's very much an I Am song. I mean, it only says I Am twice in the title, so.
I Am What I Am, it twice. That's a pretty good hint.
Yeah, producers, that's the thing, is like even comedic musicals, even musicals that are meant to be campy and fun, like good ones still follow the same kinds of structures, you know? Even Book of Mormon is another great example. Like, Book of Mormon has all checks all the boxes, you know, of story structure and of key changes being used to tell the story and raise the stakes. And each of the characters has like an I am song, and each of the characters has like an I want song, and then there's an 11 o'clock number for Nabulungi gets her own 11 o'clock number, which is the Hasadiga reprise, you know, and then Elder Price and Elder Cunningham get their 11 o'clock number, which is also the finale. Tomorrow's a Latter Day. Like, they all get, like, all the characters' journeys hit all of the same structural points. And it's this ridiculous, vulgar, like, offensive mess of a show, but the reason it's so successful is because it follows that structure, no matter how vulgar and crude it is. I believe that if you're going to use a motif is really powerful, and you need to wield that power responsibly. You know, you can't just use the same melody for no reason. It has to say something, because whether you want it to or not, the music says something, you know? Music always says something, whether you want it to or not. And so you have to be conscientious of what you're saying by using that music, because if you're not, you might end up sending a message you don't want to send. And so I take issue with Andrew Lloyd Webber's use of motifs in general.
For those of you who are enjoying Mateo, he's going to be a permanent feature of the class. He's going to be with his piano when we do various shows. I'll be asking him what's interesting musically about the show. So if you want more Mateo, just keep coming back to...
And you can check out my YouTube channel as well for more in-depth analyses of musical theater songs. That is Music Theater Theory on YouTube. So check that out as well.
Put it in the chat.
Sure, I will, actually.
Y'all up there in Canada spell theater funny, so...
yeah, we spell it the French way.
Yeah, people might want to know. Julia says she needed this. That's very nice.
But I've been listening to Broadway music for over 70 years. And I got to tell you, thanks to Mateo and David, when I go back and listen now, I listen with a lot more knowledge about what they're really trying to tell me. And I want to thank you both and look forward to much more of it.
Hey, thank you, Gerald. That means a lot.
And here's another video I think you'll like.